Dylan, what a pleasure have you here and be able to talk to you. How are you doing?
Fantastic. Happy to be here.
Are you enjoying the conference?
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah.
It's third year in Amsterdam, or third year of this conference, but it's a really unique audience, a lot of passion, and a different kind of flavor of conferences. So than the usual one in the States. So I love it. Had a fireside with Jack Mullins yesterday, and he's one of my favorite people in Bitcoin. So it was an honor and a pleasure, and it was a big crowd to finish up the day. So it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I mean, it was like packed, completely packed.
Yeah.
So tell me, we spoke with George about Bitcoin for Corporation yesterday, and that's quite interesting how different companies are entering into the space. Obviously, MicroStrategy led the way, kind of started buying Bitcoin, and now we see MetaPlanet, where you are actually an advisor to them that is kind of following the path of MicroStrategy, but also is looking out to be different, because they are a company from Asia. So tell us a little bit about MetaPlanet strategy, how are you helping them, and actually the importance of corporation to getting into Bitcoin.
So I'm working with MetaPlanet as the director of Bitcoin strategy there. Funny title. But I think the general theme is that Bitcoin is I mean, this is the new money. We're still early in the adoption phase. What MicroStrategy has done is nothing short of otherworldly, outperforming basically every company in the S&P 500 over the last 4 years. Even like Nvidia, going from $1.5 billion in market cap to $35 billion, with no core change to the business outside of switching the money they use, switching the currency that what they're denominating their value in. So I think it's the biggest story in corporate finance. What MetaPlanet is doing is a similar strategy. It's obviously multiple. It's 2 orders of magnitude smaller. But the mechanics of it and what we're trying to do, and the idea of accretive dilution, the idea that equity dilution, issuance of new shares, traditionally a very scary, bad thing for equity investors, something to avoid at all costs. For Bitcoin and the Bitcoin strategy, it's actually kind of flips the logic on its head. So that's what we're working on, and it's gone well so far. And I think we're just getting started at MetaPlanet.
So in my company in London, we are working with different public listed, businesses. They obviously are using this tool of issuing equities, to raise funds, and I think the element about dilution and creating shareholder values is always a big topic. That lots of retail investors, can get quite angry because gosh, there is another placing, you're printing even more shares. What the business is doing, and sometimes the company is not even profitable. So I think those are really important points when it comes down to public markets. And obviously you're working with MetaPlanet. How are you thinking about educating public company to Bitcoin? That's like one of the challenges. So helping them to understand a better way to manage their treasury, to manage their assets. What do you say to them?
I think the first thing is to get on board with the Bitcoin thesis before you can start talking about equity dilution and debt to buy Bitcoin. It's more so, why should you own it? Why should you take a little bit of your cash and buy some? And then I think once you get that and figure that out and maybe execute on it at an individual level, maybe if you're the CEO or the chairman of the board, or once because a public company, it's not just like me or you pulling up an app and buying Bitcoin. You have to educate the board. You have to communicate this with investors. There's regulatory, custodian. You have to kind of get all this stuff out of the way before entering the strategy with full force. But I think what you mentioned about like shareholders and the fact that traditionally they would say, why are you diluting our stake? When you look at Bitcoin, at least let's just say MicroStrategy, exclude MetaPlanet from the story. Whenever you see MicroStrategy come out and say, hey, we're printing another billion of shares in non-technical speak, that's what they're doing. Shareholders cheer. They say more Bitcoin per share. And so MetaPlanet has kind of experienced the same thing. We said, hey, we're going to do a 100% dilution equity round. We did what's called a rights issue. So we offered every shareholder the ability to invest in the company, put additional capital in at a discount to the current market price. And everybody cheered because despite the 100% dilution, if fully exercised, the Bitcoin per share would go up by 55%. So this is like, again, this is a radical notion in corporate finance. We don't expect, especially for Bitcoin for corporations, to go from 0 to 100. But it's more so about telling the story, helping build frameworks for public companies to say, what can we do? What are the things that we can do? Okay, we can buy Bitcoin. What can we do next? Who do we work with? What's the starter kit for how we can, get off zero? And that's what's exciting for me.
I think it's very interesting what you said. It's also not just educating the board about what Bitcoin represents, it's also creating the framework of trusted party that you can work with to make sure that this strategy is going to be effective and efficient. And also quite interesting what you said, the shareholder, they actually are happy when MicroStrategy announced that because it's more Bitcoin. It's also kind of think for a corporation, they could think a new way to rebuild their shareholder base. What type of shareholder or investor we want for our company, people that actually believe in Bitcoin or have our vision of the world. So I think that's kind of what MicroStrategy managed to do, because one thing is educating the board, but at the same time, you need to make sure that your shareholders are also happy with your strategy as well.
Yeah.
Was that difficult with the MetaPlanet, or how did you go about that with the MetaPlanet?
Well, MetaPlanet is a unique scenario, and I think even Michael Saylor's talked a bit about this Bitcoin for Corporations, the MicroStrategy conference in May. We talked about the early adopters of this, even MicroStrategy back in 2020. They're not the companies that have everything figured out. The companies that are firing on all cylinders, record profits, record treasury, record market cap, they're not the ones that are going to look for this new radical thing. They don't want to shake things up. They don't need to. It's the companies that, whether because of inflation or, changing macroeconomic landscape, for instance, MetaPlanet, right, was a commercial real estate company with over 30 hotels across Asia. And the COVID pandemic basically destroyed that, and their portfolio went from 30 hotels financed with debt to 1 hotel with no debt. And so there was a need or a desire to have a strategic pivot. So I joined post that shift, and the shareholder base since April 2024 to today has gone up 12 times over. So the amount of shareholders has increased 1,100% in 8 months or so. So the shareholder base is absolutely different, but especially in a market like Japan, or I think globally, there's all of these Bitcoiners that are super passionate and are starting to understand the story at the corporate level. And so I think this isn't a 1 year, 2 year, 3 year gimmicky trend. This is the start of Bitcoin in public markets. This is a one-way shift, right? And as more and more companies understand it, and I think as someone like MicroStrategy continues to outperform basically everything on the planet, it becomes a no-brainer.
Let me ask you a question. Many traditional investors or institutions are obviously not familiar with Bitcoin, and they are providing most of the capital to public markets.
Yeah.
So getting them into the space is going to take quite some time because it's a completely new paradigm shift. What is the strategy that you are working on to actually implement this transition?
Well, I think, for instance, BlackRock's ETF at the start of the year has been the most successful ETF launch in history. You have Larry Fink, CEO of the largest asset manager in the world, BlackRock, coming out on CNBC and saying Bitcoin is bigger than government. This is a store of wealth that's insulated from fiscal deficits. And this is what Bitcoin maximalists have been saying on Twitter and kind of internet forums for 10 years. And now we have the biggest names in finance and economics on a world stage coming out saying this, right? And so BlackRock's putting out presentations showing the debasement of the dollar over the last 100 years, right? And so I think this is, the institutionalization of Bitcoin. Some people may think it's a bad thing, or we don't want the biggest companies, but I think this was always inevitable. Bitcoin is and was always going to be adopted by Wall Street. So this is just the first step. So I think for what we can do is continue to beat home the message, the data and the numbers and the thesis speak for itself. But yeah, I think they're all coming, and they're coming because Bitcoin incentivizes us all from self-interest, right? It's ultimately self-interest on their end. And so from a public market perspective, a lot of people, like from my understanding of it, haven't looked into the actual mechanics of MicroStrategy, what they're doing. And it's kind of like, they were lucky, right? For me, I've done a lot of work in trying to understand it. And I think that it's absolutely brilliant. And I think it will be a case study, a decade from now about how this $1 billion software company became one of the larger companies in the world. So I think, any early movers or first movers from the public market standpoint will also greatly benefit.
Thank you, Dylan. Thank you so much.
Thank you.